Lawyers of Reddit, what was your OSHT moment in court? Sat in on a personal injury case where the plaintiff broke their leg in an accident and had a doctor on the stand as an expert. The woman's lawyer begins questioning the doctor about their experience with leg injuries. He was a well-known orthopedic surgeon in the area. She asks if he's ever treated a tibular fracture. The leg bones are tibia and fibula, to which he only answers no. Then she starts grilling him with questions about the tibula. After about 6-7 questions she asks, how did you get a medical license and have been able to practice medicine this long if you've never treated a tibular fracture? And begins a small rant about going after his credentials and those that gave it to him. To which he simply responds, there is no bone named the tibula. The lawyer became beet red and everyone in the room tried their best to keep from laughing, including the judge. I was representing a plaintiff in a hit and run case. Plaintiff is testifying and is, despite me preparing them for several hours the previous day, an absolutely terrible witness for her own case. Like, she couldn't even identify the street she was crossing when she was hit by the car. It was a major highway and we had gone through the sequence of events countless times the day before the hearing. The OSHT moment came during cross-examination. Defense counsel pulls out a picture of my client dressed up and ready to hit the club, which was posted to Facebook the day after the alleged accident. I, thinking quickly, object because the timestamp refers to when it was posted, not when it was taken. Defense counsel show the picture to my client and asked her when the picture was taken. Sure enough, they say it was taken the day after the accident when she was supposedly in unbearable pain. OSHT. When I was in college, I was a bailiff. Guy is on trial for murder. First witness testified that she saw the defendant shoot the victim. Second witness states the same. Police officer testimony is that he arrived at the scene and defendant was there holding the gun. Coroner testimony is that the first bullet hit the victim in the arm. The second bullet hit the victim in the torso and the third bullet hit the victim in the heart, which was the fatal shot. Defendant yells out, "See, that proves that I didn't kill him." I think this qualifies. Though it wasn't me that was the lawyer. Got called for jury duty. Was at the jury selection phase. And they asked if anyone here thinks they should not. Blah blah. Defendant was in the room. I raised my hand. The defending lawyer looked at me like, oh, this ought to be good, and asked me to explain. I suggested I tell them in private. He insisted I tell the courtroom. I said, okay. I probably shouldn't be on this jury because I was on a previous jury for this man which returned a guilty verdict. Lawyer's face went OSHT. Commotion and a wait while they looked up records. Yet, verified. Whole jury was now tainted. Everyone goes home. And they start over. Not mine but my boss's one. She had to defend a small-time delinquent as duty solicitor. Before going to court he asked her what he should do. She explained to him if he was cooperative and truthful his sentence would be milder. After hearing the case the judge asked him if he wanted to add something. He got up and explained to the judge. My counsel told me to be truthful. So I wanted to tell you that I not only did the robbery I'm being heard for but also several others in the region. He continued to admit to several robberies that had been unsolved yet, and everyone, even the state attorney, were facepalming. Literally the first thing I ever did was just a law student intern. Guy has a legit defense on a drug possession case. Drugs found in a jacket. Guy wasn't wearing jacket. They were going to have a very difficult time proving the jacket belonged to my guy. Had a long meeting with client. Explained everything. Client was excited. Day of the preliminary hearing. Guy shows up and sits down directly in front of the officer who arrested him. Dart. While wearing the jacket in question. The exact same jacket we were going to say they couldn't prove belonged to him. Not in court but at a tribunal. And also I was plaintiff. Suing for wrongful termination. My red. So you terminated him because he was ill. Employer. Yes, mister. And he was ill because he's disabled. Employer. Yes, mister. So you fired someone for being disabled. Employer. Yes. Edit. Formatting and a word. Dart. Was in court for a directions hearing. The judge was already in a bad mood and asked why we were here for such a seemingly pointless litigation without giving details. He was right. The barrister starts to make our case. And I am taking notes about areas we need to further explore when I hear, "Excuse me. Why were you so rude to me?" The client, who had been told to not come, had come to court that day and was evidently incensed by the judge questioning the merit of their case. They berated the judge for about 3 minutes, with me and my co-counsel first stunned and then trying to shut them up, before he adjourned the hearing. The case did not go very well, to my client's surprise and fury. Big sigh. Not me but my former law partner. She was in court representing a client, I think in a hearing for a restraining order against her soon-to-be ex-husband. Our client was telling the judge that when they met to exchange the children for visitation, the ex had kicked her. He immediately angrily shouted, "She can't prove it. I didn't leave a mark. Thanks, buddy." Probably the funniest one I ever came across happened to a colleague. We were prosecutors then. 18-year-old defendant applying for bail. He needed a residential address and got his dad to show up at court to confirm that the family home was available to him. Defense lawyer gets old dad to confirm that son can stay at family home. Dad says yes. My fellow prosecutor gets up and asks dad, "Do you really want him home?" Dad goes off the deep end. Jesus. The grief he's brought me and his mother. Out all hours. Taking drugs. Hiding stolen property in the garage. All-night parties. I'm on antidepressants and the wife's had a nervous breakdown. Dad goes off on one for 5 solid minutes. As the defendant gets taken back to the cells, he calls out, "Thanks Dad. I owe you one." 2 moments in a DUI trial. 1. Passenger is testifying for driver's sobriety when the DA asks her, "You keep saying he was sober, but are you even tips certified? A course for bartenders so they can recognize drunk patrons?" She was. Not a lawyer, but a defendant. As a teenager, I got busted with a couple of buddies throwing eggs at cars. We were only actually in the courtroom for our sentencing. There was no trial. The judge called each of us up individually to ask us if we had anything to say. One of my friends tells the judge that he is a good kid who doesn't normally do things like this. Lie. We used to do it all the time. And that I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I wish there was a video of my other friend and I sitting in the benches watching this happen. We simultaneously dropped our heads into our hands because we couldn't believe that idiot just said that. The judge was not pleased. And she took the opportunity to remind him that going to a store, buying eggs, going to another location across town, and then throwing those eggs at cars was not just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not a lawyer, but I was a character witness for my childhood dog in a civil trial between our neighbors and my parents. Opposing counsel was questioning me. I wasn't even out of elementary school at the time. And he asked if our dog was aggressive. She was a Rottweiler and very loving and incredibly protective of me and my siblings. His final question to me is one I will never forget. He asked, "Did your father tell you what to say before you came into court today?" I responded yes. Then he asked, "What did he tell you to say?" I said the truth. Now I was too young to remember the courtroom reaction. But according to my father, the judge audibly guffawed and the opposing counsel lost all the wind out of his sails. Character witness for my dog has me smiling. They are so loyal to us. We should return the favor. I was at a hearing arguing that my client was wrongfully terminated because the employer failed to abide by the proper procedures. During the hearing, a witness for the employer tried to offer documents that were fraudulently altered in order to make it look like the proper procedure was followed. I noticed the alteration. Opposing counsel quickly got that witness out of the room. And after a quick adjournment, my client got a large settlement. Opposing counsel was a nightmare. Everything late. His work was extremely subpar. And so forth. Accused me of lying multiple times when he had dropped the ball. During another hearing in which he did another dumb move, judge says, "I'm glad you are the last case on the call, and all of the other attorneys have left the room. So they aren't here to hear me say that you are a terrible attorney." During jury selection, I can't be a juror due to the fact I'm kinda racist. I mean, I'm not going to condone racism, but at least being self-aware about it is a step in the right direction. Dart. Oh, this was probably just a line to get out of jury duty. Watching a hearing when the defendant said, "I mean, I did stab her, but it was a gentle stabbing." Medical malpractice defense lawyer here representing hospitals' doctors. This was not my OSHT moment but plaintiff's OSHT moment. For context, usually at trial, both plaintiff and defendant will have an expert physician testify as to their opinion to whether the doctor hospital performed everything correctly. I thoroughly researched plaintiff's expert, who was an OB-GYN, baby delivery, and found out he had been suspended a number of times for his own botched deliveries and giving incorrect medical testimony to help plaintiff's cases. During the actual day of trial, turns out he was not licensed to practice medicine independently without supervision from another physician, and he was 1 year into his 3-year suspension. Plaintiff's lawyers had no idea about their own expert's background and they just sat there with a blank look on their face. Needless to say, during cross-examination, we destroyed his credibility and won at trial. Not in court but a deposition. Plaintiff in a sexual harassment case that was suspected to be paid role play with her boss, kept a very detailed sex diary on her work computer. At one point she was asked to read from the diary for the record and asked if she had written the accounts and if they were true. She was asked at several points if she wanted her new husband to leave the room while she did this, but declined. Let's just say it was extremely kinky. She confirmed it was true, and the only mention of her now husband was that he was boring in bed, but she was going to marry him because she couldn't get her first, second or third choice. He ended up leaving on his own after she read that part out and confirmed it was him she was writing about. Not a lawyer, but I witnessed my ex-wife try to argue with the judge that she couldn't be accused of kidnapping our daughter because our daughter was legally emancipated. Not a spoiler. She wasn't at the time of the kidnapping. My ex had legal statutes written on small sheets of paper she had torn out of books in the jail library, and she kept arguing with the judge after being told that none of it mattered. After the 5th time my ex interrupted the judge with her nonsense. The judge slammed her hands down, stood up, leaned over her bench, and told my ex that she had been a juvenile court judge for 20 years and was well aware of the statutes. If she interrupted one more time then she would be held in contempt and spend several months more in jail. My lawyer held up his folder in front of his face to hide his grin during this exchange. I walked out with full legal and physical custody of my daughter, court-supervised visitation for my ex, and a full restraining order. 2 high-profile men on trial for killing another guy, both ex-cops from the 80s. Notorious time in our country for police corruption. The first trial had been aborted after one barrister had made a casual comment that the other accused had already killed 2 or 3 people. Second attempt was 6 weeks into an expected 10-week retrial. All of the networks and papers were covering this trial. The gallery was always packed with law students because of the many uniquely horrific aspects of the trial. So, we're 6 weeks into the retrial. Defense 1 gets up to cross-examine a witness. Did you know of accused murderer 1? Yes. He was a cop and a drug dealer in the 80s. The court basically exploded. The judge immediately issued a non-publication order, meaning there was an embargo on all information from that day. It was early afternoon but the judge excused the jury for the day, then spent the next day and a half deliberating over whether to abandon the trial, over halfway through, and for the second time. Not exactly in court, but I was defending a juvenile robbery case, where there was very little evidence. There was supposed to be 2 guys, but they only picked up this one kid. He had no stolen property on him. He was picked up like outside his own house. wearing different clothes than the victim had initially said. This kid was on the honor roll at school. His family seemed kind and were involved. He wrote poetry and played instruments. I actually believed it was a legit mistaken identity case. I went to meet with one of the kid's mentors for a character reference, and he exactly matched the description of the other robber. I was the dumbest that almost screwed myself. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I accepted the first plea, which almost always carries probation, but my plea didn't have that condition. When it came time to accept the second plea, the prosecutor didn't include probation because she assumed my first charge put me on probation. She said as much to the judge, and me being a big dummy almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed my shoulder and, "I shit you not," told me to shut the duck up. She doesn't know. Never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake. Staff attorney for a judge. Had a domestics hearing over some issue. Final divorce hearing. Custody mod. IDK. The mother's attorney is a prolific asshole in the community. Puts on a big dog and pony show because clients like to pay for billboard. Legal eagle crap. Pretty bad reputation in our legal community. Father's attorney. Young attorney. Mom's attorney, old guy. Stands up and is attempting to examine his witness. Mom's attorney stands up and objects to literally every sentence the father's attorney starts. Judge just kind of sits hoping it will calm down. Tells mom's attorney to sit down. He continues. And just before the judge finds him in contempt, father's attorney turns and says, "You may think because you're older than me, you can treat me with disrespect. You can hoop and holler all you want, but you won't do it at my expense. If you want to put on a show, go join the ducking circus." Attorney's name. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to say too much, but basically, on charges of growing marijuana, stated he was growing herbs for medicine and gestured air quotes with his hands, and then whispered, "I kid you not. Marijuana, bro." Represented a pro bono client that had just turned 18 and was charged with serious property damage. I walk into his bail hearing and the judge looks at him and goes, "I knew you'd be back as an adult." The judge then turns to me and says, "Counselor, you may want to learn about your client's history. No bail." Edit. To answer some of the questions below. 1. I considered it to be extremely inappropriate and objected to it. Juvenile records are sealed for a reason. The judge overruled the objection but made sure to articulate that his denial of bail was for reasons related to the instant case. 2. The firm I was at had a pro bono program and worked with the public defender service in the area. 3. The judge at the bail hearing wasn't the judge for all other hearings in the case. He just happened to be the one handling bail hearings that afternoon. Never ask a question to which you don't know the answer. Prosecutor suggested to me client that the canned goods he had burgled were to be used to trade for drugs. Me thinking the idea ludicrous, asked my client whether he has ever traded food for drugs. To which he replied that he once exchanged a frozen chicken for heroin. Needless to say, I didn't win that one. Now, but have been on a number of juries. Kid was being charged with arson in his high school. First sign of trouble. Prosecutor is trying to get the investigator to say something specific. Note: this was a fire investigator. What did you see? It was a bathroom. Anything else? Sink? What else did you see? Mirrors. What else? Trash can. Anything in the trash can? Paper towels. Anything unusual about the paper towels? They were burned? Thank you. Then she calls the co-conspirator who has made a plea deal, who according to opening statements will testify that the kid defendant started the fire. The kid spoke and acted like a stoner. What happened? We had some aftershave. We got some paper towels and poured the aftershave on the towels. Then I lit them. I mean, he lit them. Your Honor, I'd like a recess. End of trial. Not a lawyer, but was working at the jail when an inmate came back from court and immediately went on suicide watch. Apparently he was up for a plea deal and was only looking at 6 months, but started questioning some of the facts. which let in a ton of previously denied evidence. This new evidence linked him to 6 B&Es and Arpes. He walked out of court facing a 99-year sentence, which he was certain to get, all because he opened his mouth. Edit. The lawyers were arguing over a pair of the victim's panties. He apparently chimed in with something he shouldn't have known. That brought in evidence that was previously inadmissible to not only this case, but 5 other burglary Arpes evidence, which by the transport officer's words, good enough to metaphorically duck him for 100 years. Well, also because he'd committed heinous crimes. I'm not an attorney, but a reporter whose beat is the county courthouse. So I've had plenty of these moments happen in front of me. A guy was convicted of attempting to murder several police officers. At his sentencing, the prosecutor revealed the defendant got a prison tattoo while he was awaiting sentencing of a tombstone with the names of all the cops he attempted to kill. But the defendant still had the audacity to beg for a lenient sentence. He got a few 100 years in jail. Edit. Clarification in the 3rd paragraph. Do you see the defendant here in court? Witness victim looks at each jury member, then everyone in the audience. No. Judge hides his face behind file folder. Are you sure? Maybe over on this side. Witness looks confused. I'm not sure. I point at defendant. Maybe over at this table by that lawyer. Yeah, maybe. Keep in mind defendant victim knew each other very well. Edit. Format and spelling. Edit 2. I used the defendant's name, and he was in plain view from the witness stand. I think the witness was just nervous because he was buddies with the defendant. Yes. My questions couldn't have been more leading. OC was fine with me creating apathy in the minds of the jury. I was just interning in court during law school, but I'm a lawyer now. Fight in a club. Someone had broken someone else's jaw, and had 6 friends with him that insisted he had been identified wrongly because he never have a beard and the victim said he had a beard. They used a very specific phrasing to the tune of "my friend doesn't have facial hair because he is a professional in the food industry and it would go against the regulations." After 3 of the witnesses had repeated the same exact phrasing, the judge stopped one to ask if he knew what a couple of the terms in that line meant, and the witness couldn't explain it. Defense lawyer got busted for instructing the witnesses. She'd also gotten the defendant to reject a plea deal that exchanged prison time for a fine and community service. Lawyer here. I had a pre-trial conference at 9 a.m. at a court about 2 hours away. So I wake my ass up super early to drive in shitty weather to the conference. I get there and we're waiting for the other, in town, attorney. All the while I'm grumbling to myself about how I'm from out of town and I can still make it on time. Finally the court calls the other attorney's office and gets a receptionist who tells us through tears that other attorney passed away the night before. Needless to say, I was just happy to still be alive and we rescheduled for a few months later. Rude of him not to inform you he was going to die the night before. Ian L. But my buddy is going through a nasty divorce and I went with him to the initial hearing for support. Turns out his wife lied all over her deposition about everything from how much money he's making to being a violent drunk. She then tried to admit a secret recording she made of an argument that she baited him into having. His lawyer asks where the recording took place, which was in California, a 2-party consent state. Oops. We were just sitting around because of delay of some sort. Over the course of about 5 minutes, about 8 heavily armored sheriff's deputies quietly shuffled into the room and everyone was told they need to sit real duck and still until told otherwise. Another 3 big boys led in the defendant. Small Italian-American gentleman in shackles. He was up on a few pretty boring fraud charges. I'm guessing he had friends on the outside who wanted to speak to him. It was funny.